A new Muslim sultanate rises in Egypt, uniting Cairo and Damascus under one banner. Jerusalem's Frankish king refuses tribute or surrender, holding firm behind fortified walls. Baldwin IV stricken with leprosy, since youth commands with sharp intellect despite a failing body. Saladin tests his enemy's reach with fast-moving raids into Galilee, striking Christian villages and trade routes. The desert will decide who holds the holy city and who claims its soul. In the high summer of 1174, within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the scent of incense and beeswax filled the dim nave as 15-year-old Baldwin was anointed king of Jerusalem. Pilgrims knelt among the pillars whispering prayers as trumpets sounded through the basilica's vaulted gloom. Baldwin, pale and cloaked in white, stood beneath the golden dome where Christ was said to have risen. He was the son of the vigilant Amalric, now newly buried, and the kingdom he inherited was rich in relics but perilously thin in loyal men. The crown, plain heavy wrought in silver, rested on linen-wrapped hair already touched by illness. William of Tyre, chancellor and Baldwin's former tutor, watched from the choir stalls. He noted the solemnity of the rite and the undercurrent of dread. For Baldwin suffered from leprosy. Morbus sanctus, some called it a punishment, others whispered. His hands were shrouded to veil their stiffening corruption. From Rome, no indulgence came, only silence. Chroniclers note that the Pope had not yet decided whether the boy's touch was blessed or cursed. The powerful Raymond III, Count of Tripoli, assumed the regency. His task to bind lords like Bohemond of Antioch and the Ibelin brothers into common fealty. But the barons were watchful. Some doubted the Leper King would see 20 others schemed for the crown's eventual vacancy. Baldwin, sensing this, studied not only warcraft and scripture, but the ambitions of men. He learned how long a night could serve without pay, how many weeks a pilgrim convoy required to reach Arsuf, and how quickly Egypt could move ships up the Nile. Outside the city walls, barefoot mendicants walked before the true cross, singing the Te Deum as a drought shriveled the Jordan. Portents were seen in the heavens, comets, red moons, and in the market stalls where Syrian merchants whispered that Saladin had conquered Egypt not by force alone, but by divine favor. In Damascus, Ibn al-Athir wrote of Salah ad-Din gathering the broken lances of Nur al-Din's emirate like fallen branches for a new fire. The Frankish kingdom stretched from Aleppo's shadows to the southern crossings of the Kerak lordship, required constant watch. Saladin harried it with feigned raids along the frontier. At the fords of the Yarmouk River, Templars reinforced stone towers with timber, palisades their ordo militum swollen by fresh recruits from Provence and Apulia. Though barely 300 fit men held the valley garrison, according to one Latin chronicle. Baldwin remained vigilant. While the barons dined in stone halls exchanging oaths and glances, the boy king listened to Muslim captives and Genoese traders alike. He knew that every truce was a prelude to breach, and that Jerusalem's strength lay not only in walls but in unity. Even so, the horizon darkened. A message arrived. Saladin's column had swept down toward Basra. Its scouts scouted the pilgrim road north of Tiberias. Neither the regent's gold nor the king's will could stop what would come when the sultan's gaze turned fully west. In the year 1174, as the young leper king Baldwin IV took the throne in Jerusalem, another power was rising in the east. Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known to the Franks as Saladin, consolidated his rule in Cairo following the death of his former master Nur al-Din. A Sunni Kurd governing an Arab-dominated Egypt, he navigated a world riven by tribal rivalries, religious factions, and the lingering influence of the Fatimid Caliphate. Ibn al-Athir records that Saladin faced suspicion from veteran emirs and resentment from palace guards still loyal to the old regime. He moved carefully, balancing military authority with political diplomacy, aware that one misstep could unravel his fragile authority. Within the twisted alleys of Cairo's citadel, incense still drifted from Fatimid shrines. The old caliphate's shadow lingered in whispered loyalties and sullen mutters among the black-robed bureaucrats. To assert his legitimacy, Saladin aligned himself closely with the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, earning official investiture and a black banner, symbol of Sunni orthodoxy and caliphal favor. It fluttered behind him like a judgment. Yet among Al-Andalusian scholars and Turkish mercenaries in the court questions remained, was this Kurd merely an opportunist or the Sultan destiny required? By 1176, Saladin had crushed his most dangerous internal challengers. Through a campaign of calculated arrests, martial displays, and generous patronage, he secured Egypt's fractious provinces. He reorganized the Diwan and imposed stricter control over tax farms, ensuring his coffers flowed with Nile gold for buying loyalty and provisioning troops. Sources estimate he could call upon between 12,000-20 mounted warriors across Egypt and Syria, a force formidable enough to begin real conquest. With Cairo solidified, he turned his gaze north toward Damascus. His vision was clear: to unite Muslim Syria and Egypt under one banner, the banner of the Ayyubids. This was not mere ambition, it was strategic necessity. Only a unified front could hope to dislodge the Crusader states. He began his march toward Damascus, the city of Nur al-Din, presenting himself not as a conqueror, but as a unifier and champion of jihad. Usama ibn Munki, whose castle had once resisted court and cross alike, lamented the shifting allegiances. Princes fell like date fruit at first frost. Along the road to Damascus stood wary emirs, uncertain whether to resist or submit. Saladin's letters sent ahead, laced with Quranic martial rhetoric and sealed with his personal tughra, were both invitation and warning. He rode not beneath a personal emblem, but the caliph's own black standard signaling sacred war and sultanic order. When he entered Damascus in the same year, it was not with battering rams but with prayers and alliances. The muezzins of the Umayyad mosque called his name in blessing, and in the courtyard, veteran Ghazis wept for Nur al-Din while offering their swords anew. In Saladin, they saw continuity, not rupture. William of Tyre, watching from afar, noted the gravity of this new threat. For the first time since the Crusades began, the Franks faced a leader who could marshal the resources of both the Nile and the Levant. Saladin's emergence signaled a shift in the balance of power. His ultimate goal, whispered in councils and declared in mosques, was the recovery of Jerusalem. Already word reached Christian scouts in Tripoli and Antioch of garrison drills outside Homs and new levies gathering near Aleppo. From the Euphrates to the Sinai, watchtowers burned their signal fires in warning. And now, with the Syrian heartland within his reach, the Sultan's next move remained unknown, but its destination was feared by all. The fate of the Holy City would soon hinge on the resolve of a dying king and the gathering storm of a sultan who commanded two capitals. Late in the year 1177, Salah ad-Din, Sultan of Egypt and Damascus, led a powerful army north from Fustat into the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem. Having secured his realm's southern borders and confident in his strength, he sought a swift victory to humble the Franks and pave the way toward Alquids. His forces, sources vary, but most cite around 20, including cavalry, archers, and supporting Bedouin irregulars, poured across the coastal plain near Ascalon. Believing the Leper King in Jerusalem to be incapacitated, Saladin allowed his army to spread wide for foraging, encamped over many miles like a net cast loosely upon the land. King Baldwin IV, then barely 16, and racked by leprosy, defied his body's decay. Though pain seared through his limbs and his fingers were wrapped in linen, he rose to meet the threat. Messengers galloped from Jerusalem to Gaza, summoning the Ordo Militum Christi, Knights of the Temple and Lords of the Southern Marches. Within days, under the Vexillum Sanctum, and accompanied by the sacred relic of the true cross borne by the Bishop of Bethlehem, the king rode out. William of Tyre described him as clay consumed by fire, yet showing no fear. The Franks advanced swiftly. Their host, perhaps only 375 knights and several hundred foot, as per the Gesta Regum Hierosolumet Norum, moved by forced march, cloaked in the dust of the dry November wind. The clang of harnesses mixed with the cries of priests offering indulgentia to those who fell in righteous combat. Beneath Antiochian and Jerusalemite banners, they surged north. At Montgisard, a low hill rising near Ramla, they caught the Ayyubid army unready. Saladin's main body was isolated, mistaking the small Christian force for a rear guard. Then trumpets blared and the charge began. A wall of iron surged down the slope. The ground shook beneath destriers. The crossbowmen and spearmen advanced under cover of saints' banners fluttering violently in the rising wind. The Templars struck first, disciplined, terrifying, zealous. Behind them came Baldwin, flanked by his barons, teeth clenched against agony, hands bound to the reins. The clash was brutal. Mail split hooves kicked up red dust, and the air filled with shouting in Latin and Arabic. Ibn al-Athir writes that Saladin himself barely escaped, discarding his tent and treasure shielded by the remnants of his Mamluk guard. Thousands of Muslim troops fell or were driven into marshland in confusion. Some Frankish chroniclers, likely exaggerating, claim that 9 out of 10 Saracens were slain or captured. Yet even Muslim sources admitted heavy losses and rare humiliation. What had begun as a triumphal march ended in desperate flight toward the Sinai. The field at Montgisard stank of blood and burned fabric. Crusader soldiers knelt in the dust and kissed the cross, giving thanks amid ruin. Baldwin was carried from the field, barely conscious, his strength worn to the bone. But the memory endured, the sickly boy who broke the Sultan's army with fire in his eyes. Yet the triumph could not last. Saladin swore vengeance. By 1179, he returned with new levies and Syrian contingents hardened by the lesson at Montgisard. The frontier braced again, knowing next time the storm would not be so scattered. The year is 1179. From his palace in Jerusalem, King Baldwin IV, now in his 20s, governs a kingdom under immense pressure. His body, ravaged by leprosy, is a shell of its former self, yet his mind remains sharp, his will unbroken. To the east, the Sultan Saladin, having united Egypt and Damascus, sharpens his blades for jihad. Baldwin's strategy is one of hardened defense. He pours treasure and manpower into strengthening the kingdom's eastern frontier, the vital line of the Jordan River. Among these strongpoints rises the new fortress of Chassalit at Jacob's Ford, a strategic crossing north of the Sea of Galilee. William of Tyre notes the king's urgent command to complete its walls, a desperate bid to control the main invasion route into the Latin heartland. Chassalit stood not only as a bastion of stone, but as a symbol. Its chapel housed relics of the Passion, and a copy of the Vexillum Sanctum, the sacred banner believed to shield the faithful. Pilgrims and knights alike laid votive offerings at its altar before departing to guard the ramparts. The summer winds hissed through the Jordan Valley, dust clung to mail and sun-baked timber. Then in late August, Saladin descended. His army, perhaps 70 strong by some accounts, bore battering engines dragged from Damascus and Cairo. Chronicler Ibn al-Athir records how the Sultan's engineers, skilled in undermining, labored by day and prayed by night, sensing both the tactical and spiritual weight of the target. The Frankish garrison, mostly Templars and northern footmen numbering about 700, fought with disciplined fury. For 8 days the clash of iron and the cries of the wounded echoed over the ford. From the tower flew the black and white standard of the Templars, stiff in the wind. But on August 30, the mines beneath the walls collapsed with a roar. Saladin's troops surged into the breach. A slaughter followed. Only a handful of defenders were taken alive, and the rest met martyrdom or fire. The chapel was pulled down, its sanctified stones hurled into the river. The Sultan ordered the fortress razed entirely, and the last result of Baldwin's grand frontier vision vanished in smoke and screams. News of the fall reached Jerusalem, with the stench of burned wood still lingering in the eastern valleys. The court, already shaken, now reeled. The fortress had cost over 100 bezants, nearly half the crown's annual revenue by some reckonings, and its destruction emboldened critics of Baldwin's policy. Amid this unrest succession, fears grew dire. With no children and his illness worsening, Baldwin took a path he hoped would preserve continuity yet forestall civil war. He named his young nephew Baldwin IV as heir. The boy, barely 5, was the son of Sibylla Baldwin's sister, yet the king refused to entrust power to her husband Guy of Lusignan. Guy, a Poitevin knight of uncertain reputation, had arrived only recently in the Holy Land. Though pious in appearance, many barons viewed him as impulsive and vain. Raymond of Tripoli and Bohemond of Antioch voiced open unease. To support Baldwin V's claim, Baldwin IV summoned barons to swear homage directly to the child, bypassing feudal norms. William of Tyre records the ceremony in the Great Hall. His words were labored, his arms veiled, but his command unwavering. The moment bound lords to an infant, but split them from a man who believed himself chosen to rule. Outside Jerusalem, Saladin's tents shimmered near the basalt ridges of the Golan. Scouts watched supply lines. Emirs debated their next raid. Within the Latin walls, suspicion festered. The king's strength waned, the succession was fragile, and the Sultan of Cairo had tasted blood. In the spring of 1182, Saladin turned his armies north from Damascus, crossing the Jordan into the fertile plains of Galilee. His objective was not mere plunder but systematic devastation. By targeting the breadbasket of the Latin kingdom, he sought to starve its garrisons and cripple its military capacity. More pressing still was his political aim, to provoke a field battle that would bloody the Crusader ranks and sap their morale before larger ambitions were realized. Baldwin IV, though advancing in sickness and worn by leprosy's cruel grip, remained the mind behind the defenses. From the citadel of Jerusalem, beneath the gleaming dome of the Holy Sepulchre, he directed patrol routes, musters, and cautionary councils. The Ordo Militum, Templars from Safed and Hospitallers from Bethjablin, formed the sinew of response. These were no levied pilgrims but seasoned veterans bound by oath and spurred on by indulgentia, and the relics of saints carried before them. Trumpets echoed across Galilee as Saladin's banners, emerald and inscribed with Quranic verses, unfurled under the spring wind. His army moved in wings, Turkish light cavalry first, then Sudanese spearmen, then the Ayyubid camp followers with ox-drawn carts and siege wood. Chroniclers like Ibn al-Athir note that each village left unburnt was counted a mistake. Olive groves crackled in the sun. Wells were filled with stones, granaries and thrashing floors were given to the torch. The Jalad and Kishon valleys, once verdant, lay under a haze of ash. The Franks responded with measured haste. The king's orders, recorded by William of Tyre, were plain delay, and harass, give no ground senselessly, and above all reveal no weakness. In one engagement near the springs of Ain Jalut, Hospitaller banners met Saladin's Kurdish horsemen in brief but bitter combat. Though the Franks managed to repel the raiders, they lost over 50 riders, a heavy toll for armies the size of Jerusalem's, which rarely exceeded 500 mounted knights in the field, supported by perhaps 3 times that number in foot. The Latin commanders feared not only defeat but depletion. Each armored knight required 3 horses, and many beasts perished from heat overuse or poisoned wells. Quartermasters from Acre struggled to secure fodder. As these burdens mounted, civilians paid in both blood and coin. More than 10,000 peasants and pilgrims crowded behind the walls of Nazareth, Nablus, and Jerusalem. The churches rang with desperate masses. Smoky incense masked the scent of unwashed bodies and cattle penned in cloisters. 3 times Saladin attempted to draw the Latin forces from cover. Each time Baldwin's officers resisted, even as younger knights hungry for glory a day chafed at restraint. Some accused the Regency Council of cowardice. Others recalled Jacob's Ford, where 2 bold assaults had cost Jerusalem dearly. By summer's end, having scorched the land but failed to fracture the Crusader army, Saladin withdrew across the Jordan. Yet the campaign had laid bare the kingdom's mortal dependency, not only on steel and castles, but on barley, oil, salt, and pilgrim coin. Acre sea lanes grew riskier with each raid, and that harvest once lost would not return until another year. And in Jerusalem, Baldwin IV, blind in one eye and carried on a litter, knew that patience alone would not forestall the next blow. Fevers in the Holy City. By late 1183, Baldwin IV could no longer ride. The leprosy that had defined his reign now confined him to the shadows of his chambers in Jerusalem, his body, frail, his face, hidden beneath linen and balm. Courtiers whispered prayers beside the lattice screens, incense smoldered in brass censers, and messengers passed through the royal halls bearing grim news from the frontiers. With Saladin's cavalry again spreading fire east of the Jordan, the kingdom required not a symbol but a sword. Reluctantly, Baldwin turned to his brother-in-law Guy of Lusignan and named him Bailey, regent in all but coronation. It was a decision sealed not with joy but with oil and legal formality. Guy owed his elevation not to prowess or consensus, but to the king's narrowing options. Baldwin, seized by fever and faith, placed the kingdom's fate on one who had never commanded a field army. Some nobles murmured misgivings, others bowed, bound by feudal oaths and the fear of schism. Soon after, Saladin ignited movement near Al-Karak, sending forces across the Jordan and loosing raids into the heart of Transjordan. The call to arms went out along the Rignum. Templars from the Dome of the Rock, Hospitallers from St. John, hundreds of knights from Acre, Nablus, and Haifa. Sources vary, but Guy may have assembled nearly 1,300 cavalry and up to 10,000 foot, though many were poorly provisioned. Under the Vexillum Sanctum bearing the cross blessed in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, they gathered on the eastern slopes. Guy marched toward the Jordan plain, smoke rising on the horizon as Muslim raiders torched vineyards and cisterns. Near the fords of Damia, he caught sight of Saladin's column. It was a moment that demanded instinct, but Guy lingered on the high ground, waiting for terrain to favor a frontal assault. He formed his troops in rigid lines, wary of ambush. The trumpets blew, but no charge came. Saladin, perceiving the hesitation, split his cavalry into rapid detachments and withdrew eastward by nightfall. Dusk veiled his retreat like a hand across a lamp. The failure lay not in ruin but in silence. Guy had neither lost men nor seized the enemy. He had watched from a distance while the Saracens faded, barons cursed beneath their breath. William of Tyre records that none rejoiced as the banners returned. Many lords, Reginald of Sidon, Balian of Ibelin, even the Count of Tripoli, began to question the very foundation of Guy's authority. They had seen nothing but indecision, Christian banners fixed in the wind, while plunder-laden camels crossed the river unopposed. Back in Jerusalem, the bells of the Holy Sepulchre tolled for vespers as word reached the royal chamber. Baldwin IV, blind in his remaining eye, skin disfigured and hands bound in cloth, summoned his council. There in the hall, glittering with icons and grief, he revoked Guy's stewardship. The charter was undramatic, but its meaning rang clear. The regent was stripped. Sibylla, Guy's wife and the king's sister, did not appear. Her silence deepened the palace's tension. The nobles obeyed the revocation, but alliances frayed. Some whispered that the queen's blood still entitled Guy to rise. Others feared Rome's reaction, for no papal endorsement would soothe a fractured throne. Beyond the walls, winter clouds brewed, and the dust of Saladin's horses had not yet settled. Jerusalem entered the season of pilgrimage and penance, but war would return with the spring. And when it did, the kingdom would have no unified banner to answer it. In the spring of 1185, the kingdom of Jerusalem held its breath. Within the royal chambers of the Holy City, Baldwin IV lay immobile, his body ravaged by leprosy. Blind, fevered, and racked with pain, the king who had once led charges at Montgisard could no longer lift even a hand. The air in his rooms hung thick with incense and the scent of corrupted flesh. A crucifix gilded with silver flickered in lamplight above his bed, and the clamor of pilgrims in the outer courtyards seemed to belong to another world. William of Tyre, who had watched the king grow from a gifted boy into a resolute monarch, records the solemn weight of those final days. Baldwin summoned his council and reaffirmed the succession. His nephew Baldwin IV, barely 8 years of age, would wear the crown. The boy's small hand was placed upon a book of the Gospels. Around him armored men bent the knee. Among them stood Raymond of Tripoli, Balian of Ibelin, Jocelyn of Courtenay. Each swore oaths to God and relic to uphold the boy's reign. A regency council was confirmed. As William writes, all feared lest the realm fall prey to the designs of men. 5 days later, Baldwin IV died. He was 24 years old. As bells tolled through the stone cupolas of the Holy Sepulchre, the Leper King was buried beside his father King Amalric in solemn rites thick with candle smoke and doleful chant. Outside, the narrow lanes of Jerusalem filled with penitents barefoot and cloaked in ash. Some saw a bad omen in the dusty winds that rose from the eastern hills as the tomb was sealed. The Regency Council moved swiftly. Raymond of Tripoli, as senior regent, governed the day-to-day affairs, while couriers dispatched word to Antioch and Tyre that the succession stood intact. Yet the political ground shifted beneath their feet. Guy of Lusignan and his wife Sibylla, Baldwin's sister and the mother of Baldwin IV, began to muster support among knights and lesser nobles, especially in the south. Their court moved through Ascalon and Jaffa, offering gifts recalling feudal oaths and casting doubt on Raymond's motives. Sibylla claimed divinely sanctioned motherhood. Guy whispered that no regency should overrule his wife's bloodline. Knights loyal to them began marking their tents with a silver cross atop a red field, a subtle warning of rival allegiance. The regents feared that open civil war could shatter the fragile peace. From his seat in Damascus, Saladin watched closely. Ibn al-Athir would later note the Sultan's careful silence during this time, waiting, like a lion before a wounded prey. Saladin strengthened his garrisons on the Jordan crossings, summoned cavalry from Aleppo, and dispatched ships from Alexandria up the coast, merchant convoys bearing grain, but with arms hidden below decks. By spring's end, observers recorded increased movement of troops along the caravan routes near Horan. In Acre, portside merchants whispered of fleet musters in Tyre. In Nablus, Templar scouts grumbled about unpaid stipends, and the lesser barons withholding troop levies, fearful of being drawn into a dynastic trap. The strain grew with the heat, and so the winter passed into an uneasy spring. The Regency Council governed, but its authority was brittle. In the vineyards of Ascalon and the crowded markets of Acre, men spoke in hushed tones of Guy's ambition and Sibylla's claim. The banners still flew over Jerusalem, but the unity beneath them had begun to fray. The stage was set not for battle but for betrayal, and Saladin waited his hosts gathering on the edge of desert and sea, sensing weakness. In the sweltering summer of 1186, the boy King Baldwin IV died in Acre, not yet 9 years old. The fragile Regency Council, led by Raymond of Tripoli, shattered in an instant. Baldwin IV's sister Sibylla moved swiftly. With the support of her faction and the military orders, she claimed the throne in Jerusalem. But her next act tore the kingdom in two. In a bold ceremony within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, she placed the crown upon her own head, then immediately crowned her controversial husband Guy of Lusignan as co-ruler. William of Tyre, then in the city, would later describe the tense, divided atmosphere in the hushed nave. Raymond of Tripoli and the northern barons refused to acknowledge the coronation. They saw Guy as a reckless upstart, a man raised outside the Levant, untested in command, and answerable to no established house of the Holy Land. The realm split along geographic and familial lines. Some lords rode to Tiberias to pledge allegiance to Raymond, others remained in Jerusalem with the new monarchs, their swords drawn more to protect holdings than to uphold oaths. In the hilltop castles of Galilee and along the coastal road to Tyre, rival messengers galloped at midnight, each bearing contradictory orders sealed with noble sigils. The Templars, caught between their oath to the crown and their strategic alliances, found their loyalty strained to the breaking point. Their marbled chapter hall in Jerusalem rang with argument. Grand Master Gerard de Ridefort bound himself to Guy, and Sibylla, convinced their rule alone could unify the beleaguered kingdom. But many knights, recalling the military blunders at La Fourbe and hearing rumors of Reynold stirring discord, feared the realm would unravel under weak hands. In Damascus, Saladin watched with rising anticipation. The crescent banners raised across Syria bore green Quranic script invoking divine sanction for war. His scribes recorded a surge of messengers, each bearing word of the Christian fracture. He issued a general call for jihad, al-Jihad al-Kabir, summoning levies from Egypt to Jazeera. Ibn al-Athir wrote of roads darkened by marching men and prayers rising through the dust. Sources estimate between 30 and 60 troops assembled beneath his standard, buoyed by dreams of redemption and revenge. The enemy fractured, the Sultan's scouts moved. By August, Muslim riders tested fords across the Jordan and smoke rose from signal fires west of Basin. Barefoot pilgrims arriving at Jerusalem's gates shared tales of desert ambushes and quiet preparations. In-acre merchants debated prices for cured meat and horses, uncertain whether to stock for war or flee by ship. At Holy Sepulchre, the incense of coronation had scarcely faded before whispers of betrayal and battle filled the cloisters. In the narrow cloister courts of the Hospitallers and in the scriptoria of monastic advisors, men weighed oaths and coin. Could they march for an unpopular king? Could they stand against the Ayyubid tide without unity? Somewhere above the convent rooftops, the autumn winds shifted, bringing not merely dust but the scent of distant encampments. And still Saladin's army grew. In late 1186, the fragile peace between the Latin kingdom and Saladin shattered along the desert caravan route south of the Dead Sea. Reynold of Chatillon, lord of the great fortress of Al-Karak, launched a swift and violent raid on a richly laden Muslim caravan, more than 200 camels bearing silk, spices, and pilgrims, bound for Mecca. The caravan included women, children, and elderly among its travelers, and rode under the protection of a formal truce. This was no random act of banditry. It was a deliberate act of spite and dominion, echoing Reynold's earlier threats to attack the holy cities of Arabia. From his camp near Damascus, Saladin received word of the outrage and sent immediate demands for restitution to the Frankish court. The Sultan, who had personally guaranteed the caravan's safety, saw the attack not only as lawless but deeply sacrilegious. To break Ammon, guaranteed safe passage, was to undermine the very fabric of diplomacy in Islam. King Guy of Lusignan, newly crowned and already isolated among his barons, faced no easy road. Feudal loyalty demanded that he protect Reynold, a lord whose fortress guarded the kingdom's vulnerable eastern flank. But religious duty and political prudence called for justice and conciliation. William of Tyre, then ailing but still sharp of mind, later described the court as divided by passion and bereft of wise counsel. Some advised appeasement, others war. Guy, uncertain and keen to hold power through alliance with Sibylla's allies, gave Reynold his silence, which amounted to an endorsement. For Saladin, this was the final breach of faith. The raid was not merely theft, it was a desecration of the Hajj route, and a humiliation borne before the eyes of the whole Dar al-Islam. A chronicler of Aleppo recorded that the banners of transgression passed beyond the line of patience. The Sultan now had cause that even cautious emirs could not deny. He declared the truce void and summoned his governors and commanders from Egypt, Aleppo, Homs, and the Jazeera. Riders raced southward along the Nile and north to the edge of Armenia, carrying sealed orders and black banners marked with the Shahada. In Cairo, storehouses of arrowheads and siege machinery were emptied. In Mosul, contingents under Izz ad-Din prepared to march. Ibn al-Athir recounts that the hearts of the people surged like floodwaters at word of the outrage. The fires of jihad, kindled over years of restraint, now rose high. Within weeks, the roads and ridgelands of Syria and Transjordan fumed with motion. Turkoman scouts swept ahead of the Ayyubid host, while light infantry, barefoot and robed in the dust-colored tunics of the steppe, gathered at strategic passes. Camels groaned under loads of grain and poles for mangonels. Trumpets and kettle drums boomed in the mountain defiles near Al-Shabak. By some accounts, the army that answered Saladin's call numbered 30, or more others write of nearer 40. The Franks meanwhile quarreled in Jerusalem. Panic passed among the merchants and pilgrims as whispers spread of vast Saracen columns. Some nobles urged a preemptive alliance with the northern states, others trusted in holy relics and the defenses of their castles. Raymond of Tripoli refused to offer aid unless his control of Galilee was confirmed in writing. The true cross was moved to the temple precinct. The wind from the east turned hot and dry. Along the Jordan frontier, scouts began to vanish. The desert, long silent, now stirred as if gathering breath. In the searing heat of July, 1187, Saladin's army swept into Galilee like a desert storm. His forces, estimated between 25,000 and 30,000, included cavalry from Aleppo and Mosul, drafted under the banner of jihad. They advanced with deliberate speed toward Tiberias, where Countess Esheva held the citadel isolated and encircled. From Damascus, Saladin had prepared this campaign with care, depots of fodder, scouts to foul wells ahead of time, and orders to avoid pitched battle until the Franks moved first. At La Sefri, King Guy of Lusignan faced his trial not on the field but in council. The papal standard stood beside the royal tent, fluttering above clashing voices. Raymond of Tripoli, lord of the very city under siege, urged caution. He warned of waterless ridges of dust veiling the sun and of the Sultan's lure. William of Tyre later recorded that pride not prudence won out. Gerard of Rydfort, master of the Templars, demanded action, invoking knightly duty and holy vow. The Ordo Militum must not watch while Christian blood was spilled. Guy yielded. On July 3, the host of Jerusalem set forth. The reliquary of the true cross, venerated as a remnant of Golgotha itself, was raised before the army. Priests swung censers over the ranks and psalms were chanted against the wilderness. Nearly 1,200 knights rode behind it, including contingents from Montferrat, Ultra-Jourdain, and the military orders. Their goal was Tiberias, but the land between was barren, sunstruck, and alive with Saracen arrows. Saladin's skirmishers struck swiftly. Horsemen lit the dry grass and smoke rolled ahead of the wind. Visibility dropped. Thirst rising, panic, exhaustion. By dusk, the army reached Mascana, far short of Tiberias. Wells promised by scouts were dry or fouled with dung. Packs were ransacked for rotted skins of wine. Horses refused to rise. The silence of the stars brought no relief. At dawn on July 4, the Crusader column stumbled forward. Drums echoed from the heights. Saladin had already seized the horns of Hattin, a double summit near Lake Tiberias, and planted his standards. He tightened the circle. Ibn al-Athir writes that the sky turned red with smoke and the ground was ruined with blood. Arrows fell like summer hail. Knights countercharged, but the slope and dust robbed them of force. The infantry, parched and blinded, abandoned discipline. Some fled toward the lake, others to the hills. The knights rallied once, twice, then broke. The banner of the Hospitallers collapsed. The field became a trap. The Ordo Militum was cut down nearly to a man. Attempts to guard the true cross failed. It was seized by Mamluk cavalry and paraded from the field. King Guy and many nobles surrendered by nightfall. Reynold of Chatillon, taken alive, would not see another morning. Only a small remnant escaped. With the knights broken and the holy relic lost, no field army remained to defend the kingdom. Saladin's columns now turned south, leaving behind the dead and the bleeding and carrying Jerusalem's fate upon their spears. On the 4th of July, 1187, beneath a merciless sun, the army of the Latin kingdom made its final stand at the horns of Hattin. Saladin's forces had harried them for days, setting the dry grass ablaze and sealing off every route to the Sea of Galilee. Parched and surrounded, the Christian knights fought in a choking haze of dust and smoke. William of Tyre writes that the smoke was so thick men could not see the banners of their lords. At the center of the host, the Bishop of Acre bore the relic of the true cross, a fragment believed to be from the very cross of Christ. Its presence had always meant hope. Now it meant desperation. Beneath the beating sun, banners sagged in the heat and trumpet signals were lost in the din. Pilgrim-sterned warriors clutched icons and crosses, some weeping aloud, others silent with timor mortis. Archers from Aleppo and Hama loosed volleys in coordinated waves, their arrows darkening the sky. Saladin's cavalry, drawn from Egypt, Syria, and the Jazira struck in converging arcs. Their coordination displayed both discipline and spiritual momentum. They rode under the banner of jihad, certain of divine sanction. The Ordo Militum of the Templars and Hospitallers fought to the death, their white mantles stained with sweat and blood. Their famous charge, usually decisive, broke against layered Muslim lines and rolling cavalry screens. Knights fell grasping the hilts of broken swords. By afternoon, the Christian army had collapsed. Fulcher of Chartres later lamented, "The Lord's warriors died as sheep without a shepherd." King Guy's great red tent was captured, and the king himself taken alive. Raynald of Chatillon, the Lord of Kerak, whose raid on a Muslim caravan had helped provoke the war, was brought before Saladin. Offered a cup of iced water in a gesture of hospitality, Raynald drank, then handed the cup to King Guy. Saladin saw this as an unforgivable breach of etiquette. He had not granted Guy the same courtesy. With his own sword, Saladin struck Raynald down, fulfilling a personal oath. Guy trembled, expecting the same, but Saladin reassured him, "Kings do not kill kings." The true cross, the reliquary that had once steadied armies and drawn pilgrims to Jerusalem, was torn from its bearers and taken as the greatest of spoils. Ibn al-Athir records that its capture struck the Franks with a sorrow deeper than any military defeat, for they believed it carried God's own breath. With the entire field army destroyed or captured, some sources estimate over 15,000 killed or taken, the road inland lay undefended. Saladin moved with stunning speed. Acre, the kingdom's richest port, surrendered within days. Sidon opened its gates. Beirut's garrison fled by sea. One by one, the great coastal fortresses and towns yielded, their levies too few and leaders slain. Only Tyre held firm, bolstered by survivors and sea resupply. The military orders had been nearly annihilated. Scarcely 100 Templars and Hospitallers remained alive in the entire Levant. In the wake of Hattin, messengers rode south and west with grim tidings. Church bells tolled in panic from Nazareth to Jaffa. In Europe, the papal curia would soon receive word, accompanied by the shattered seals of noble captains. Saladin now turned his army south toward the greatest prize of all. The road to Jerusalem lay open, its fields empty of defenders, its cities stripped of knights. But the holy city itself, though filled with refugees and fear, had not yet surrendered. Its walls were strong, its people determined. A final defense was being organized, not by a king, but by a baron who had sworn to leave. The fate of the Crusader kingdom now hinged on one city, one stand, and one man's choice to break his word. In late September 1187, the army of Saladin encamped before the walls of Jerusalem. The city lay exposed, its fields trampled, its wells watched. Most of the kingdom's knights had been slain or captured at Hattin months before. Now a bare handful of fighting men remained. Perhaps fewer than 50 knights stood ready. The rest were pilgrims, merchants, priests, and refugees, all braced for assault or slaughter. William of Tyre notes that the city's only hope lay in a leader who could forge a defense from fear itself. Into this chaos rode Balian of Ibelin, a baron who had been granted safe passage by Saladin to evacuate his wife and children. But upon seeing the city's desperation, he broke his oath of non-combat. He sent his family to safety in Tripoli, then took command of Jerusalem's defense. He knighted every boy of noble birth old enough to hold a sword and organized the citizens into militia companies. Craftsmen mended broken, male women prepared cauldrons of boiling oil, priests moved through the streets chanting psalms, the scent of incense mixing with the odor of fear. They hung the Vexillum Sanctum, a remnant of the true cross, above the Holy Sepulchre. Relics were paraded along the walls to steel the hearts of the faithful. Bells rang through the hours, urgent, shrill, ragged, while watchers on the towers counted tents beyond the Mount of Olives. Fulcher of Chartres once spoke of Jerusalem as Caput Fidei, the head of the faith. Now that head waited to be struck. Saladin's army advanced methodically, his sappers digging trenches and his archers launching clouds of arrows. Siege towers inched toward the northern wall. From the ramparts, Balian's makeshift forces hurled stones and Greek fire. They held the line through the first days, but the Sultan's numbers were overwhelming. Ibn al-Athir records that Saladin, enraged by the resistance and mindful of the bloodshed, when the Crusaders first took the city, initially refused terms. Each night torches moved like stars across the Saracen camps. Horns called the faithful to prayer just as cathedral bells begged the saints for mercy. Fear thickened the air. Inside the walls, children wept as timor mortis, fear of death, settled over monastery and mart. Bread was rationed. Water lines stretched long. Corpses were buried quickly under broken flagstones. No reinforcements came. Balian knew the defense could not last. He sent envoys warning that if no mercy was offered, the defenders would destroy the Islamic holy sites, the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, and slaughter every Muslim prisoner within the walls. Faced with this threat, Saladin relented. He agreed to spare the lives of the citizens in exchange for a ransom. Those who could pay 10 dinars for men, 5 for women, 1 for children would go free. Those who could not would be enslaved. Sources vary, but at least 10-0 went unredeemed. So ended the Christian hold on Jerusalem. On October 2, Saladin's banners were raised over the Tower of David. Balian himself handed over the keys to the city. Thousands streamed out through its gates, some to freedom, others into captivity. Monks abandoned altars, and the last Templars wrapped their swords in cloth. It was the final legacy of Baldwin IV's Leper Kingdom, not victory, but a negotiated surrender that spared a city from massacre. But in the West, the shock of Christendom's holy city lost reached the thrones of kings and the pulpits of priests. Whispers became cries. Urban guilds pledged silver, barons summoned banners, and Pope Gregory VIII composed a solemn bull of indulgence. Vengeance stirred, and sales were being rigged.